I would like to open today's meeting. Welcome to meeting 110 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday in November 2023. The committee is going to discuss its study for accessing transportation for persons with disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders, and therefore members will be participating as well as in Zoom.
Feedback events can occur and can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. The most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece worn too close to a microphone. Therefore, ask all participants to exercise a high degree of caution when handling the earpieces, especially when your microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on. In order to prevent incidents and safeguard the hearing health of our interpreters, I invite participants to ensure that they speak into the microphone into which their headset is plugged and to avoid manipulating the earbuds by placing them on the table away from the microphone when they are not in use. Colleagues, for the first hour of today's meeting, we have appearing before us as witnesses from Arch Disability Law Center, Mr. Gabriel Resnick, staff lawyer by video conference. Welcome to you, sir. From Disability Without Poverty, we have Ms. Michelle Hewitt, Chair. Welcome to you. And from Access Now, and from As an Individual, appearing before us, we have Mr. Bro, Max Bro, Senior Consultant. Welcome to you, sir. We're going to begin our opening remarks, and for that, I will turn the floor over to you, Ms. Hewitt. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you for inviting me to speak today. As was said, my name is Michelle Hewitt and I live in Kelowna, BC. I am the Chair of Disability Without Poverty, a national charity. I have had the privilege to fly on a number of occasions. It is always extremely stressful and usually results in some damage somewhere to my wheelchair. I could give you a laundry list of things that have happened, but I'm going to concentrate on one major event. In October 2013, I was flying with my daughter, who's here today with me as my assistant, and our family to meet up in Florida with my parents flying in for England to celebrate my mother's 70th birthday. After everyone had boarded the plane in Vancouver, there seemed to be a delay. The reason was my wheelchair had been destroyed. It had been put in a freight elevator with the door left open, and the chair left with no brakes on. Once the elevator began to move, the chair, weighing 350 pounds, fell from 20 feet to the tarmac below. It could have caused major injury or killed somebody, but luckily it didn't. It's hard to describe the shock and panic I felt, even though I remember it vividly. I felt trapped, stuck on an airplane, not knowing what I would do on the other end, my mobility gone, and everybody else would walk off to continue their day. Initially, I was given a manual wheelchair in Florida, which meant I needed someone to push me. After a few more days, a power wheelchair was found, but it was too small for me. I spent most of the holiday in bed. To this day, I have chronic hip pain from the injury caused from spending 2 weeks in a chair that did not fit. When I got home, I continued to spend days in bed recovering. While another rental power chair was sourced that fit better, it didn't work particularly well, so I couldn't trust it outside the home. 6 weeks later, my father died in Oakville, Ontario. I couldn't go to his funeral. I was still in acute pain and acute fatigue. I didn't have a wheelchair I could travel with, and even if I could make it past those two obstacles, I couldn't face getting on a plane again so soon after losing my chair. In total, it would be 3 months before I received a new wheelchair that fit me and worked. I cannot fault, though, the customer service I received from WestJet in replacing my chair, but it simply takes that long to get a custom wheelchair that cost, at that time, $25,000. That one small action of not securing my chair in that elevator cost me my dignity and independence for months and shook my confidence. It stopped me from attending my father's funeral and still causes me physical pain now. Incredibly, it almost happened again on this journey. Time permitting, I'll tell you some more about that later. Flying has so many risks to us. When a piece of equipment a disabled person relies on is damaged, it's not like a suitcase being lost. It's an intrinsic part of who we are that's crucial to how we function. Being delayed might mean the medications or the meals we plan now don't work out, or a layover in a hotel room not equipped for us. Disabled people are 27% of the Canadian population, but I doubt we make up 27% of the people that fly. So I've made a note to myself here, because I wrote this before I left home. This time I've also travelled for the first time with Leo, my service dog. It's his first time flying. Perhaps you could ask him how that went. We could talk about that as well. I see that in the US, crucial work is being done to consider how wheelchairs can be brought onto planes. I think that this is crucial. We have seating configurations in our wheelchairs that are purpose designed for us, but on planes we have to leave them to go in with the luggage. I'm limited on how long I can fly by how long I can sit in a plane seat, when a seat that works perfectly well is elsewhere on the plane. My chair was destroyed 10 years ago, and I see that little has changed. The stories in the news recently are just the ones that reach the media. Mine never did, for example, and I'm sure there are many more. So I leave you with one all-encompassing recommendations. The airlines provide an experience for disabled people that is safe, treats us with dignity and respect, and where we can expect to get to the end of the flight with our equipment and our bodies in the same condition as when we departed. Simply an equitable experience to the one everyone else has. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hewitt, and let me welcome Leo on behalf of all members of the committee. Next, we will have Mr. Resnick. Mr. Resnick, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, sir.
Perfect. Thank you. My name is Gail Resnick. I'm here on behalf of Archview Law Center, along with my colleague, Alinka Stefan. Arch is a specialty legal clinic that practices exclusively in disability rights law. Arch has made multiple submissions related to the accessibility of airlines, the Accessible Canada Act, the ACA, and the Accessible Transportation for Persons with Disability Regulations, the ATPDR. Accessible transportation is a human right held by all and is essential for realizing full and equal participation of persons with disabilities in Canada. The purpose of the ATPDR is to provide technical requirements that support the full inclusion and equality rights of persons with disabilities in accessing transportation, a purpose which is in line with the ACA. It is essential that this committee reflects on this purpose when drafting your report. Arch provides legal services to persons with disabilities who face barriers in air travel. Currently, Arch is representing Tim Rose in his case against Air Canada, which is at the Federal Court of Appeal. Since we are actively litigating this case, we cannot talk about it other than in a general manner. In this case, we are defending the Canadian Transportation Agency, the CTA's decision, which ordered systemic remedies to make air travel more accessible for persons using mobility devices. We are happy to provide a copy of the CTA's decisions to the clerk following our submissions. In addition to Mr. Rose's case, we have been contacted by many persons with disabilities who face barriers when accessing transportation from a variety of airlines. We have also received consistent feedback from the disability communities in Ontario and across Canada about these barriers. Our following submissions are based on these cases as well as Arch's institutional knowledge in this area. I'll raise two main points today. Firstly, through our work, Arch has learned that airlines are using the ATPDR to minimize their legal obligations to accommodate persons with disabilities, which is the complete antithesis to the purpose of the ACA and the ATPDR. Arch has consistently raised this concern ever since the development of the ATPDR. Airlines must be reminded that the duty to accommodate under the Canadian Human Rights Act applies equally to them as other service providers. Under the ATPDR, Section 2 states that regulations have no effect on existing legal obligations, including the duty to accommodate under the Canadian Human Rights Act. In addition, Section 2.1 of the ATPDR states that the regulations are to be interpreted so as to require that persons with disabilities be treated with dignity. This committee should recommend that the Government of Canada and the CTA reaffirm the ATPDR's clear direction that airlines must comply with accessibility regulations, and in doing so, confirm that persons with disabilities have the right to be accommodated on an individual basis and with dignity, ensuring equal access to transportation. Now on to my second point. As was just well described, accessible transportation is essential for persons with disabilities in Canada. Airlines and airplane manufacturers must implement a plan for universal design, including in procurement, in order to eliminate barriers that continue to exist in every facet of air travel. There's a need for airlines and aircraft manufacturers to investigate possible modifications to aircraft and airline equipment to allow for fully accessible air travel. Common accessibility issues that we know of include being separated from a mobility device during travel, which may lead to the damaging of their device, airlines not accepting mobility devices on cargo space, which often leads to not being able to travel whatsoever, inaccessible washrooms, inaccessible on-plane entertainment systems, call buttons, and announcements. We recommend this committee and Parliament urge airlines to proactively procure devices that are accessible and work to modify existing devices to ensure accessibility. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Resnick. And finally, for opening remarks, we have Mr. Bro. Mr. Bro, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, please.
Yes, as it was stated, my name is Max Bro. I'm a senior consultant at BDO Canada, but I'm not here for my corporate responsibility. I'm here as an individual, and I want to make sure that's a clear record. As most of you probably have read my herring trip to Hawaii, what you don't know is that prior to COVID, I used to travel all the time. I used to travel through airlines, you named it. But I never complained. And I'm here today to talk about two real big things. First of all, I want to address one thing. There is a myth right now. There is a myth that what you're hearing in the newspapers and what you're hearing in general internet is, a one-off. The airlines are giving you a false impression. When I've experienced my travel, I would say about 40% of the times I experienced issues, from lost wheelchairs to damaged wheelchairs, you name it. But I never had an issue until I flew to Hawaii. The singular reason why Hawaii is the different trip is because my wife got to experience it, and it made my wife cry. And she's in this room today, and I made a vow that to make sure that the airlines paid for that particular situation, because they made her experience what should have been a great family event into a nightmare. Now, I really want to touch on the simple fact that what you're hearing is just the touch of the iceberg when it comes to people traveling with disabilities. Time and time again, if you were to go into airports, you would see on a daily, frequent basis individuals with disabilities and families with disabilities incurring issues within the airports on traveling, from various different things to where is their equipment, to how they're going to deal with their children or themselves with neurodiverse issues. One thing is that is really important. I can't sit here and tell this committee X amount of people are experiencing X amount of issues due to X. You know why? Because we do not, as a country, calculate this information. We don't tabulate it, and we don't circulate this information around. I could tell you from where I come from, I have a great amount of really smart, analytic people who would love 18 months of getting this information and coming back and telling you what that looks like. But I don't have that ability to do so. But there is something of a lining down the road. Before COVID, Disney used to say all the time, and by the way, Disney, give me a call and tell me what the new numbers are. Disney used to say before COVID that 25 million United Americans used to make a decision based on a member of their family having a disability. Since we are a population about a tenth of the size, I would assume that anywhere between 2.5 to 5 million families, Canadian families, are making that same decision. Do the math, folks. What a colleague of mine just recently told me is a great analogy. The analogy I'm going to use here is if the banking industry was to say to this committee, look, we deal with $2 trillion worth of funds annually, but you know what? If we're missing about $200 million, So what? The interest rate will hide that. That's what it sounds like to my community. Well, the things that are happening to my community is a crisis. And if this was a banking situation, everybody here who's listening to me would go, oh, wow, we need to have hearings and find out what's happening to that money. So the first recommendation I make is that the CTA should have the power and the strength to collect the data which is going on and to make that information public on an annual basis. My second recommendation is a little bit off, but think of this, and you've already heard it from two individuals already today. I am an individual, and as you can see, I come in an electric wheelchair. By the way, I would like to introduce you to Roxanne. This is what I call my wheelchair, Roxanne. And I'll tell you why I call her by name. I never lose sight of her. I'm either sitting in her or she's always in my eyesight, 99% of the time. Even when I go to bed, I have a straight view to my wheelchair being charged. I know where she is all the time. The only few times that I let her go is when I travel by airlines. And when I give my wheelchair to somebody, I expect to see Roxanne at the other side of the road. And for that reason alone, here's my second recommendation. The human rights that I have as an individual need to be given to my wheelchair, which means that when my wheelchair is damaged, if any accessible equipment is damaged, it is inherent a human rights issue. And for this reason alone, airlines, the travel industry needs to recognize the fact that when I give what is quintessentially my legs to them, that they respect it as the same way it was a human body, a person. If I gave my kids to the airlines and I said, can you make sure they get to point A and B safely? They'll do everything in their power to make sure that that child gets there safely. I ask for the same kind of consideration for my wheelchair. And anybody in my community is asking for the same kind of consideration for their equipment, that it has the same human rights that I have the privilege to have. My last recommendation, and the gentleman who was speaking before me was touching upon this. In reality, the airlines and the travel industry is not taking its time to talk to us as a community. And I can tell you right now, if they were starting to talk to the people who design wheelchairs and design equipment, we can design better wheelchairs and better equipment that can work with the airline industry. But that kind of communication needs to start happening. We need to start training the people who disassemble my wheelchair and reassemble it to understand how to do it right, because I can't do it. Look, I'm a policy guy. I'm like you guys. I read things and I tell you what to do. But once I'm on at a third world nation and my wheelchair shows up in many different parts, I have no clue how to rebuild it. Neither does my wife, but my wife has many other things. Thank you for the time, and I'm here to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Breaux, and I'm sure you'll be able to expand on that with the line of questioning that our members will have for you. I'd like to ask for the consent of the members to combine all of our witnesses into one large block of 2 hours as opposed to splitting them into two. And the reason for that is because some of the witnesses in the second hour have informed us that they will no longer be able to make it for the second half. Do I have unanimous consent to do that? Okay, so adopted. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Mr. Fenton from the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, who's joining us by video conference. Sir, I turn the floor over to you. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir. Hopefully you can hear me okay. And I'm sorry for the technological problems we had this morning. My name is Robert Fenton. Professionally, I'm the Director of Legal Services at the Calgary Police Service. In my volunteer life, I'm the chair of the CNIB National Board of Directors.
Mr. Fenton, my sincere apologies. I don't mean to cut you off, sir, but your camera is not open. If you could do that, please, so that members could see you.
Okay. Sorry, there was a pop-up that I didn't see.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. I'll restart your clock so you can restart your opening remarks.
Okay, can you see me now?
We can't. We can see the reverse. I think your camera is on front facing, sir. You'd want to turn it around so that we can see you, if that's possible.
Okay, I don't know which camera I've got running here. Let me just do this. How am I going to do this?
Put a mirror there. We'll still see it.
Oh. Do you see me now?
We do not, sir. Let me just
Oh, my
confirm with the
God.
clerk here real quick.
Because I have this should be working. This works for every other Zoom call except you guys.
Yes, Mr. Backrack.
I wonder if you might ask for unanimous consent to hear the testimony without the front-facing camera.
Do I have unanimous consent to hear the testimony? I believe it was for the interpreters, and I'd like to confer with the interpreters really quick. Was that correct? Okay, perfect. So I have the thumbs up from the interpreters. Thank you, Mr. Backrack.
Okay.
Sir, we'll allow you to continue with the camera in its current function. And once again, I'll restart your clock so that you can re-begin your opening remarks.
Okay. My apologies. This is with VPNs and everything between you and me at the police service. We're having all kinds of trouble. As I said, my name is Robert Fenton. Professionally, I'm the Director of Legal Services for the Calgary Police Service. I'm here in my volunteer capacity, though, as chair of the CNIB National Board of Directors. We are here today to present several recommendations to you on how to improve air travel for people who are blind, who have low vision, and who are deafblind. While we do support the needs of other people with disabilities, we don't have the lived experience to speak to those directly, and we will leave it to other groups to speak on behalf of their own needs and their own circumstances. As you may know, CNIB has been involved in advocating for changes to the transportation system since its inception, really 106 years or so ago. We've talked initially about changes to promote equal access to the rail system initially. And as far as aviation is concerned, CNIB has been actively involved in the Accessible Standards Committee that is run by the CTA on accessible transportation and in various other initiatives, and has been extensively involved as well in the passage of the air transportation regulations, which I know have been of great discussion points throughout the committee's testimony. CNIB has submitted a brief to you. I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time going through that brief because I'm sure you've read the material. And instead, what I want to do is I want to focus on the areas in which we will be making recommendations to you in response probably to the various questions that we will be answering. We want to talk to you about barriers to the booking process and check-in. We want to talk to you about barriers about navigating the airport, making payments for various things, such as for checking bags or buying something at stores at the airport that you may need to use. Wayfinding at the airport and the inability of the airports to advertise or demonstrate that they have accessible wayfinding technologies installed. The need to treat passengers with disabilities with dignity at all parts of their journey and respecting the independence that they deserve as they access the airport system and the aircrafts. To talk to you about security barriers that we face as we take new technology onto the plane that security staff isn't familiar with, and the invasive questions that we are required to answer when dealing with security personnel who are encountering new equipment for the first time. We want to talk to you about changes to the aircraft itself and accessibility barriers that exist on the aircraft. We also want to talk to you about meet and assist program, meet and assist policies and processes that the airports have in place, and retrieval of baggage and barriers that occur there when you're a passenger with blindness or with low vision. And finally, we want to talk to you about guide dogs and the barriers that people with guide dogs face, as well as issues pertaining to documentation, proof of documentation, and retention of information by air carriers relating to a person's disability. We have also reviewed the committee's brief that the ADA or the AODA has filed, as well as listening to their presentation. And we adopt those recommendations in addition to the 20 or so recommendations that we will outline for you in response to the various questions that you will ask us today. Thank you very much for having us, and I'm prepared to answer questions when you want to hear from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fenton. Next, we will go to, from Access Now, Mayan Siv, who's the Chief Executive Officer, joining us by video conference. I turn the floor over to you. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Honorable members of the committee, good morning. My name is Mayan Ziv. I'm the founder and CEO of Access Now and the chair of the Accessible Travel Journey Technical Committee for Accessibility Standards Canada. Although I hold these positions today, the views I express are strictly my own. As an advocate and as a passenger with a disability, I speak from personal experience of repeated failures in our air travel system. In September 2022, I traveled from Toronto to Tel Aviv. Upon arrival, I found my custom power wheelchair, which is essential for my mobility, health, and independence, damaged beyond repair. This incident left me stranded, in pain and distress, and forced me into a state of crisis management. This marked the second time in my life where airline negligence resulted in my wheelchair being declared a total loss. Each occurrence has left me physically and emotionally shattered, with effects that linger and compound over time. My wheelchair is not luggage. As we've heard today, it is an integral part of who I am and how I function. Without it, even temporarily, I face severe and far-reaching consequences. Yet there are no legal frameworks or protections that adequately acknowledge that a person's mobility device is an extension of their body. This critical oversight opens the door to ambiguous interpretations and lack of corporate accountability, leaving disabled people vulnerable. As a result, we are forced to continually advocate to protect ourselves, our bodies, our dignity, and mobility. When I shared my story on social media, my experience resonated internationally, capturing hundreds of millions of impressions and sparking the hashtag #RightsOnFlights movement. Through this movement, thousands of stories have emerged, painting a stark picture of the consistent failures in air travel. These accounts reveal only a sliver of the trauma inflicted on disabled passengers, encompassing physical harm, emotional distress, anxiety, abandonment, and more. These stories are not isolated incidents, but a routine reality for travelers with disabilities. The stories paint a picture of a pattern of behavior, of negligence and discrimination. The evidence of these systemic barriers is overwhelming, and I'd like to propose 3 measures today. We must demand comprehensive and public reporting of every incident where a disabled passenger's rights are compromised, beyond the occasional story that captures media attention. Airlines must provide detailed public data on all incidents affecting disabled travelers and our mobility devices, moving beyond anecdotal evidence and phrases like tens of thousands travel normally to a comprehensive accountability system. We must implement automatic, stringent penalties that reflect the gravity of every incident where a mobility device is lost or damaged. Our current systems profoundly fail disabled people, placing onus on those in vulnerable positions to contend against billion-dollar corporations and fractured government entities. It is unacceptable for airlines to dismiss the severe trauma experienced by disabled passengers with mere vouchers or hollow apologies. There must be immediate consequences every time for the violations of disabled passengers' rights. Travel must also be standardized and predictable, because today every flight I take feels like a negotiation to secure my well-being and my safety. We need standardized, enhanced handling and storage procedures for all types of mobility devices, with a priority on keeping devices with the individual whenever possible. Comprehensive training for staff at all levels, including executive leadership, is crucial. Robust customer service policies and transparent action plans to address issues when they do and will continue to arise. We must guarantee consistent, respectful treatment at every single point of contact throughout the travel experience. To conclude, we need a cultural shift towards greater empathy. No amount of documentation, wordsmithing, or regulation can fully capture the humiliation and pain of being disregarded, mishandled, or spoken down to as if we, disabled people, are second-class citizens. In no other mode of transportation are people forced out of their mobility aids or treated with such disregard. This dehumanization is a stark contrast to the values we claim to uphold as Canadians, and it must end. Thank you for this opportunity to advocate for change. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ziv. Et prochainement, nous avons M. Paul Lupien.
And next, we have Mr. Paul Lupien, who is president of the Confédération des organismes de personnes handicapées du Québec. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Lupien. Thank you very much. My name is Paul Lupien. I am president of COFAN. The COFAN is an organization which is a not-for-profit organization which is intended to include the participation of all persons living with disabilities in a social context. I myself am part of that community. We have people who are also functionally limited in our organization. Those people and their families are of concern to us. Well, the organization of our membership deals with the board of directors of COFAN, and what we do is advocate for the rights of all member entities. It is very important. I want to thank the House of Commons and this committee for inviting us to be here to discuss universal accessibility inclusion for people who are facing disabilities and coping with them. The Accessible Canada Act is of great concern to us in terms of transportation by rail and by sea, and also, but that is not the greatest challenge. Things are perhaps better organized by rail and by sea, but there's a concern with respect to access ramps and embarkation and disembarkation concerns as well. But there's another issue, air transportation. That is a great problem for people who are functionally limited. These people face barriers in booking and also in checking in. And I could say as well that the concern here is the transfer of persons from their wheelchair into smaller chairs. So if you're a person who is heavier, it's very hard to sit in an airplane seat, which is quite narrow. And also, there also is the fact that your wheelchair is put in the hold with the luggage. And for the others, it may be luggage, but for me, it is my legs. It is part of me, and it is my mobility device. Those people who say sometimes, oh, we're very sorry, we dropped it, and so there is a problem with my mobility device. And now I come to something else, the possibility of using the toilets on board. It is virtually impossible. If you go there in a wheelchair of any sort, you can't close the door. And if everybody else can have the opportunity to use the toilet on board, why can't we? There is also the difficulty of traveling with your guide dog or with your service animal. if you have a white cane or if you have a guide dog, these two are your eyes for somebody who is blind. They are your eyes, and people have to understand that. So basically, if you are in that position, you are replacing with a service animal or with a guide dog something that is not functional on your body. Now, COFAN does make some recommendations, particularly with respect to booking, making reservations, and we have to make it easier to be able to do that. And also, I would recommend that the airline companies provide special planes that would allow for people to remain in their wheelchairs when they are on board, and that those planes be equipped with special wheelchair toilets that were of the necessary size and space. And also people who travel with their guide dogs, that has to be, and their animals have to be taken into consideration. Sometimes when you're sitting in the airport in a very uncomfortable chair, it has an effect, it has consequences for us all. And basically what I would say, we are basically second-tier passengers. Why would we have to have this type of situation? If my wheelchair were able to be accommodated on board, there's far less possibility of it being damaged than when it is put into the hold with all the luggage. I know that it can take a long, long time before my mobility device is repaired if it is damaged. That being said, I want to ask you most sincerely to hear my words and do what you can to make it easier for us to travel. Thank you very much, sir. Can you perhaps move your microphone a little further away from your mouth, because it is extremely difficult for the interpreter to work? Thank you. Set it a little higher if you can. Here? Here? Perfect.
For the information of members, the witness that needs to leave early is Mr. Fenton. So if you have questions for Mr. Fenton, I encourage you to ask those questions early on. We'll begin our line of questioning today with Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, you have 6 minutes. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will take your advice, and I'm going to start my questions to Mr. Fenton. I first of all, though, want to thank all of the witnesses for sharing what is very difficult testimony. Clearly, these experiences are not just one-time events. They aren't something that happens and then you move on from it. It reaffirms, I think, for many people who live with disabilities, many past incidences as well. That trauma is revisited, and in many cases, it's travel is supposed to be a positive experience, and it simply reinforces that society is not yet doing the job that needs to be done to support people with disabilities. So it's heartbreaking, quite frankly, to hear some of these stories, and I appreciate the opportunity to try to be part of a solution here for all of you and for the millions of people experiencing similar experiences. Mr. Fenton, I read a post that you placed on LinkedIn where you talked about blind travelers beware when you travel through Pearson Airport now, and you laid out a scenario in which there's multiple handoffs from airport personnel to Air Canada personnel to porters to actually pick up your bags off of the luggage carousel. one of the things that we've heard, or one of the suggestions that's been made, is that we need to do a better job of eliminating all of those different handoffs, I'll call them, between airport personnel, airline personnel, security personnel, baggage personnel. It sounds to me like an individual who needs assistance to navigate the travel system could go through 5 or 6 people trying to assist them with various levels of training, various levels of responsibility. Can you talk about that part of the travel experience, and if you believe, as I understand happens in some European airports, where the airport itself is responsible for the passenger experience from the time they reach the curb until the time they're seated on the aircraft. I'm wondering if you had thoughts on that sort of a system, or any thoughts you might have on how to ensure that passengers with disabilities are not they don't fall through the cracks whenever there is a handoff between persons responsible for their travel experience.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Strahl. And just for the benefit of the committee, I will move my other commitments so I can stay as long as you need me. This happens frequently to us as lawyers, so just take whatever time you need. I will answer whatever questions you have. In response to your specific question, this is a tremendously important issue for people who are blind, or who have low vision, or who are deafblind. Every time we're passed from one person to another, we have to re-describe our bags. We have to re-describe the various services or things that we need to do. We have to retrain people in terms of what sort of assistance we may or may not require. We are dealing with people with different levels of skills and different levels of training. And it just adds to the frustration of the travel experience. I would very much, as an individual, and I suspect most people who are blind would support the idea of being able to follow one person from the time of check-in or arrival at the airport right through until they board the plane. There's nothing more frustrating than being handed off after you go through security, not knowing that the security agents have moved your bags to various terminals or to be checked, and not knowing what's where, and being able to tell the agent that's now met you where your stuff has gone. And that's a reality for those of us who are blind.
Right, and there's also the issue, I assume we've heard this before, where the person with the disability, often on the spot, is doing basically on the spot training for the person who is helping them, explaining their situation again and again and again, and having to do that 4, 5, 6 times in a travel experience is another form of trauma for people. Maybe you can express that. I certainly.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And the thing that frustrates me even more is that about 3 years ago, I did with Deloitte's a training video for Air Canada where we talked about these various issues. And it's being used by the airline. I'm recognized a number of times as I go through the airport by airline staff. Yet, funny enough, they don't seem to have absorbed the content of that video. One of the points that I make is that everywhere along the journey, passengers with disability, A, need to be treated with dignity at all times, and B, they need to be able to exercise that degree of independence they wish to exercise as part of their travel journey. And this is what's missing in all of this, is all of that independence as we're passed from person to person to person is taken away from us. And we're treated, I'm going to put it as directly as I can, we're treated like cargo. And that's not acceptable. We're passengers, just like everyone else.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fenton, and thank you, Mr. Strahl. Next, we have Mr. Iachino. Mr. Iachino, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my first question will be to Mr. Fenton. Can you elaborate on why guide dogs are crucial to the day-to-day activities for persons with a visual impairment?
Certainly. As a lawyer, my guide dog accompanies me everywhere. She comes to court with me. She goes on aircraft. She goes to work with me every day. Everywhere I navigate the community, she's basically with me. She helps me get around obstacles. She helps me travel in unfamiliar areas, especially when I don't know what the configuration is and where the turns are. I can ask her, like I could tell when I'm walking up to a store that it is a store and that there's an opening. I can tell her to turn left and she'll take me in the opening.
So it's a man's dog's best. Sorry, it's a man's best dog. Oh God, it's a man's best
I understand
friend.
what you're saying.
So I
understand
question.
you.
How do
Sure.
airlines accommodate guide dogs when traveling?
Here's the thing. There's a way they're supposed to do it, and then there's a way that some of them actually do it. And I'll add a story in here as I respond to this about a recent experience I had where I was traveling from Calgary to Vancouver to LA to Toronto and then back to Calgary over a 7-day period. When you travel in Canada, the airline is supposed to give you an extra seat at no cost for your dog to sit at the floor at. And that is to give you extra space as the passenger, the dog space, and not to inconvenience the passenger that is beside you in a group of 3, for example. When you travel internationally, that second seat is not available and you have to fit the dog under your seat that you're occupying. But what sometimes happens with the airlines is if you have segments where some are international and some are not, the airline takes the position that for the Canadian segments, you're not entitled to that extra seat, even if the Canadian segment of your trip happens even several days before the international segment. And that's what happened to me when I was on the big trip that I talked to you about. I went to the airport after being in Toronto for 2 days after coming back from LA, not knowing that the airport had given my second seat away. Arrived at the airport, I had a bag at my feet. I had this dog beside me expecting to have the other seat. And then this passenger shows up and there's no room in the bins. There's no room elsewhere on the aircraft. Of course, my bag has batteries and stuff that I'm not supposed to check. So from Toronto to Calgary, I had a dog and a bag and me in the same space. Welcome to travel.
Thank you.
2024 on Canadian Airlines.
Thank you. Mrs. Michelle Hewitt, I think you had also mentioned in your opening remarks about service dogs support, which is not obviously limited to those with a vision impairment. Could you expand on some of the other critical services they provide to persons with disabilities?
Yeah, hi. So Leo, you're not with us. Leo is here next to me. Leo provides a number of services to me. I get spasticity in my legs from my MS, and certainly being crunched up into a seat on an airline seat, that can be very difficult. And so he provides what's called deep pressure. So he literally lies on my legs. But as Mr. Fenton mentioned, they're meant to be on the floor. So we had a couple of moments where Leo would get onto my lap and the stewardess would kind of look at me and so I was kind of like, bring it on, let's just talk about this, shall we? So I did get the extra seat because we were traveling within Canada, and this was Leo's first time flying. Quite honestly, it was easier to fly with Leo than it is to fly with my wheelchair. And that I've only had the one experience. I expect I'm not going to be going internationally until things change because I can't deal with having a dog and a wheelchair and flying out of this country. And so, as I mentioned, I also can't support my upper body strength for the length of time it takes to be in a airplane seat. And my parents are 80 and they live in England. So you can imagine all of the stress that provides to me when I can't do any of that. But he also, COVID did a number on my anxiety. Leo is, he's well aware of what happens to me if I start to get anxious.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. One last question to Mr. Gabriel Reznik. Airlines have pushed back on many rulings by the CTA, ordering them to be more accessible. Are airlines committed to do this work, and how can government push them to be more accommodating?
Yeah, so this is a difficult question as we're currently in that active litigation. But one of the things government can do is more inspections, stronger enforcement. Mayan mentioned that earlier, the need for automatic penalties for certain infringements. So that would be also stronger penalties. And just for it's also up to the courts. The courts can make clear in their decisions that persons with disabilities have that duty to accommodate, and that they must accommodate under the law.
Thank you very much, Mr. Resnick, and thank you, Mr. Iachino. Mr. Fenton, I see that your hand is up, sir. Is there a technical problem that you need to have addressed?
No, I was just wondering if I could also add to the response to this particular question, if that's permissible, Mr. Chair.
I'll look around the room here. Okay, I have unanimous consent for members to allow you to answer the questions, and I'll give you 30 seconds to do so, please.
And that's all I need.
Thank you, Mr. Fenton.
I was just going to say that as part of the barriers that people with disabilities face in the regulatory process is the lack of accessibility of the processes themselves to even make complaints. As you know, disabilities do not take breaks for statutory holidays or weekends or business hours. And often when we're traveling, it's at 6 in the morning or 8 at night, and we can't access the various mechanisms for making a complaint if you don't have your phone with you or internet access. And we're often faced by airlines saying, well, the incident didn't happen the way you described it in your complaint, and they question you based on the fact that you file it a day or two later, when your memory may not be quite as fresh as it was if you could have filed it when the incident actually happened. Thank you.
Thank you for adding that, Mr. Fenton. Prochainement, nous avons Mr.
Next, we have Mr. Barcelou-Duval. 6 minutes, sir. Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to our witnesses for being here with us today. It's something that really I find very touching. It affects me to hear about the reality that our witnesses are having to live. I am not a person with a disability, so I don't know that reality. But nonetheless, I hear your description of what you are faced with, and I know the difficulties then that you are facing when you have to travel. It is important that you have come to this committee, and I thank you for your testimony. Perhaps I could start with Mr. Fenton, because we received quite a bit of testimony from people in wheelchairs, but not as much from people who have a different disability, who are not sighted. We hear about the difficulties of flying, of having access to washrooms, to the toilets, and so on. Are there peculiar difficulties that you face when you travel, particularly in terms of air transportation?
I will do my best to respond. My French is not perfect, and I don't have a link to access translations. I just want to make sure I understand the question first. You're asking what barriers are there for people who are blind on the aircraft that it might be similar to something like people in a wheelchair having difficulty accessing the washroom. Is that the essence of the question?
Oui, exactement.
Yes, exactly. That's quite it.
There's a couple of things here. It's almost impossible now for someone who is blinded to know what row they're at when they're navigating the aircraft, whether they're coming back from a washroom or trying to find their seat when they board. On the aircraft, they used to have braille and large labeling on the luggage bins at the top that we could feel and we would know what row they're at. That has been taken away from us, so we don't have that access. Another issue that we run into, especially on the 787 aircraft, is with the entertainment systems. The only way that you can access a call button is if you press a spot on the screen on the entertainment system. The problem is that spot moves, so it's not always in the same place. Other issues we've run into with U.S. carriers is that you have to order your food or any drinks that you might want. If you want a soft drink or a glass of water or something, you have to do that through the screen, which is not accessible because it doesn't speak, and they won't accept orders in any other way. So there are actual barriers on the aircraft that we face as people who are blind that are not dealt with by other passengers. Thank you.
Merci, ça répond.
Thank you. That answers my question very well. My next question is for Mr. Lupien. I heard you speak about a variety of subjects earlier, and I'm very happy to have you here with us today. I'm happy to see that you were able to participate in the committee's work. A question that I have for you, and this is something that you didn't mention, but other witnesses have mentioned, and I'd like to hear your point of view on this. The importance of how you are helped, how you are taken in charge from your point of arrival at the airport until you finish your trip. Are there holes in that whole journey from the door of the airport to the time that you disembark from the plane? When you are helped by people, would it be better to have a single person help you rather than have many people help you? Thank you so much for your question. What concerns me, for someone in a wheelchair, you can just imagine the difficulty when you have luggage. So you're in a wheelchair, you have luggage, you arrive at the airport, and if you were able to have the same person the whole time until you embark, until you board the plane, it would be a good thing. I think that would be very important. It's been said often at meetings with this committee that there was an airline company in the States that had adapted some planes. Even the bathroom had been adapted for wheelchair access. You could keep your wheelchair on board as well. It was also psychological aid that was offered to passengers, but unfortunately, that particular company is no longer in business. In a sense, as a result of COVID. But something has to be done about this, particularly for people who live with disabilities when they want to travel by air. There are some people as well who have some intellectual deficiencies who find it extremely difficult to travel. And, you know, there's also this. When we have to pick up our luggage at the carousel, and then we have to get it to the door of the airport. Surely there should be some help, probably one person to do all that.
The floor is yours. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses that have joined us today. This has been some really powerful, if not troubling, testimony, and I think it's really going to strengthen the committee's report. I also want to thank my colleagues for agreeing to extend the study by meeting to allow for more testimony from people with lived experience. I'll start my questions with a fairly general topic, and that's the one of prevalence. We heard from the big airlines at a previous meeting, and at the beginning of their presentations, they both cited statistics that seemed to me to be an attempt to minimize the prevalence or the perceived prevalence of issues involving accessibility on board airplanes or at airports. And perhaps I'll start my questions with Ms. Ziv. And I'm not sure if she heard this testimony, but I'm sure she's heard it before because this is a very common refrain from people in the industry. How is that sort of minimization received by people living with disabilities, and how do we shift that to a more realistic and solutions-oriented message from the people who are really the ones who should be responsible for changing this system?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I have heard the testimonies. And as a person who has been on the receiving end of one of the few that were suggested to have experienced the difficulty, I can tell you that the data that we don't even have on record, because there is no documentation of every single incident, is not fulsome. We don't have the proper mechanisms to hold all parties accountable in the experiences in which people with disabilities are being failed. And for whatever data they are choosing to present, those are the cases that are requiring disabled people to advocate for themselves in a position that is often a very difficult one to be in. But I have a few other points on this question, if I may. If we were not talking about disability and any person was permitted to say for the majority of flights, all passengers travel just fine. Once in a while, excuse my language, we decapitate their legs. Only once in a while. What type of sacrifice would that, would we be accepting? And yet that is the statement being made. And the fact that the airlines feel comfortable to make that statement in itself is very telling. That the passengers who experience hardship, even the smallest percent, is too great a percent. There are no incidents which are acceptable. And so, we need proper accountability to demonstrate exactly how many times and how often this is happening. This is happening every single day, often in silence. And we need to ensure that there is strong regulation so that it is not a suggestion that airlines respond, but that they have to every single time. It's not a courtesy, it is a right that they need to respond to.
Ms. Ziv, around this issue of data, which is tied to the issue around, people's perception of the prevalence of issues. In the United States, the airlines are required by law to hand complaint data over to the federal regulator, which is then made publicly accessible. Do you feel that that is a sufficient system and one that we should look to here in Canada, or are there other improvements that you would suggest in that regard?
I would say that absolutely, that is an important starting point. It allows for transparent records to be shown, and it allows us to understand the magnitude of the issue. I would go further and say that one of the biggest barriers we're facing is that the onus is on the individual to advocate, and we need automatic mechanisms that document every single instance, and not ones only perceived by what the airline thinks is an incident. So there needs to be a way in which a passenger whose rights are being violated is able to declare this without the need to navigate often inaccessible systems, without the need to, I feel like I have to be a journalist or a lawyer every time I go through a trip where I have to take meticulous images of all of my property. I need to make sure that I've remembered. I remember after the incident in Tel Aviv, I was so nervous that if I missed a scratch, I would be then considered that I didn't actually document the claim properly. When I'm sitting there in a manual wheelchair in tremendous pain and anxiety, now I'm in the position where I better get it right or I will be out. We need much better surveillance and accountability systems. So I would say, yes, we could look to the States for inspiration, but I think in Canada, given our position right now, where we are in the time in our country where we are creating standards under the Accessible Canada Act, we can do a lot more.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Yes, thank you to all the witnesses, in particular because we've heard in the course of the meetings on this study from the airlines and from the Auditor General and the CTA. But I think what has been most valuable thus far has been your testimony today, but also the testimony we heard from others at the meeting a couple meetings ago of those that have had lived experiences. Because if I encapsulate a little bit of what I'm hearing is a consensus, which should be an obvious one, is the wheelchair mobility device is an extension of your body. And to the point where, obviously, Mr. Brault has named his, in fact. And so I'm wondering, we have, cars, vans. I think maybe you can enlighten us. Train experiences where your wheelchair isn't separated, as is the case with air travel. And so I'm wondering if there's other modes of transportation that have done that well. And I think, Ms. Hewitt, you mentioned that in the U.S. they're looking at, getting wheelchairs with you onto the plane instead of the airline seat, because this seems to be a significant problem and a surmountable one. I'm not an engineer, but I would imagine this would be surmountable. So maybe you can comment on that.
Yes, so I think it's the U.S. Transportation Committee is actively examining how it is that what needs to be done to planes to allow us to get on board them with our equipment. And I think Mr. Brault said it when he talked about there needs to be some standardization as conversations between equipment manufacturers and airlines. We do have a number of locking mechanisms that work with vans that we may own or rent, and and ways when we go on buses that you're meant to lock into certain places and so on. And some of them are more robust than others. And you would imagine that perhaps an airline would want them to go to the more robust end of it. But things do exist. It's not completely impossible. If you don't mind, I'd like to turn to Mr. Brault and ask him to continue with that, if that's okay. Is that okay with you, Max?
Yeah, not a problem. So yeah, there is currently right now quite a lot of technology and advancement on how to hold a wheelchair in place. Again, the number one question you have to look at is exactly what kind of communication is going on between the designer of airplanes and the designers of the equipment themselves. And here's a great one coming from Saint Eustache originally, Bombardier. Here it is, the company that designs Canadian planes in Canada. We can come and have a conversation with them about how to design planes and ensuring that certain kind of wheelchairs can come into place. I do agree that a manual wheelchair is not as cumbersome as a wheelchair that my colleague and I are in an electric, but there is mechanisms. And I have to say that I've traveled in certain places where I've been on buses where the buses system is so complicated and rigid that I lock my wheelchair in and it's nice and solid. I mean, I'm literally part of the bus as the bus is moving up and down and filling every pothole. And so there is ways to do this, folks. This needs to occur, this kind of conversation, and it needs to be an open conversation as well.
Can I ask, because we had both major airlines in Canada here, and they have accessibility plans, which were presented. Were you consulted? I mean, those are I know some are representing themselves as individuals, but those are representing organizations. Were you consulted in the development of those?
I'm here as an individual. My charity is Disability Without Poverty.
Ms. Ziv, for example?
No, I was not.
And Mr. I'll put the name here correctly.
Fenton.
Fenton, yes.
Unfortunately, sir, you're on mute, Mr. Fenton. There you go.
My apologies. Sometimes Zoom doesn't flick over correctly. CNIB was consulted in a very limited way. We didn't actually get to review the final plan and what the airline ultimately decided to do. But I think there's another point that's worth mentioning here is the plans that the airlines have developed are based on current state. They don't speak at all to the idea of new technologies that could be introduced. For example, there was a technology that I saw in Los Angeles, a mobility aid for people who are blind that is battery powered that actually guides us around objects. I can tell you, if I was to take that onto an airplane today, they wouldn't have a clue what to do. So I think if we're going to deal with accessibility plans, we need to have the government develop standards in terms of what should be in them, but also they need to be forward-looking.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fenton. Next, we have Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do want to thank all the witnesses today for their testimony and their participation in the study. And I'll say firstly that, I guess, well, I'll say it bluntly, the outcome of this study, frankly, is that it becomes no longer the responsibility of persons with disabilities to accommodate airlines and airports. It is to now put that responsibility on the airlines and airports to accommodate persons with disabilities, period. With that said, in committee, the testimony does not belong to us. The analysts don't hear us. They hear you. And what comes out with respect to the then draft report coming to members of committee is those thoughts, those recommendations that come from you. So my attempt today is going to be to draw out of you what those thoughts and what those recommendations in fact are. So with that said, one question. You're at the manufacturer, you're in their building, and you're building that airplane. How do you expect those airlines that become the owners of those airplanes to accommodate you with respect to how those airplanes are built? We recognize when we go into public spaces that accommodations are made for people with disabilities. Whether it's a restaurant, public building, here in Parliament, on the Hill. We all recognize that airlines, especially airlines, are far from that responsibility. So how? How do we bring them up to 2024 with respect to accommodating you on the airplanes? I'll start off with Mr. Bro.
Well, to begin with, it starts with the phone call to say, I want to fly and I want to use your particular service. But to go into your question, sir, to actually design the actual physical plane itself, it starts right at the entrance. And it starts about, I don't know how many of you, when you go onto planes, but the next time you go onto planes, you'll notice this. But the planes don't actually connect with those particular areas right away. There's an actual piece of metal that goes in there. And I can tell you there's been numbers of times I've been stuck in that halfway point. And all I see is literally what looks to me is a 20-story drop. Okay? So designing something better to get into the plane. The other thing that happens, and I can't tell you how many times I've been stuck in this, and it's taken 20 to 30 minutes to get me out of this situation. I'm stuck in something called the Eagle Lift, where I'm in between the getting in the kitchen area to just getting into the doorway that I can go down the hallway of the plane. Now, we got to remember that planes are designed to be small, and they're designed to, they only have an X amount of space. But to get the right engineers and the right people from my community to come in and have the conversation about how to design better spaces to get in. And I can tell you, remember how I said 40% of the times I've had issues? I would say the 60% of the time that I had no issues, I was able to get in my manual wheelchair right up to the first row of seats and transfer right in easily. And those have been in the bigger planes, but the smaller planes can't do that, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Bro. Ms. Hewitt?
I think we need to flip the paradigm when we're okay. Yeah. I think we need to flip the paradigm on what we think about air travel is. I think we have moved to something that is ultra low cost. As Mr. Fenton said, they've even removed the I'm sure we all remember the large type braille that would be above us. And so that we don't think of air travel as something that has to happen as absolutely every plane is completely full, every space is completely filled, because we are thinking about the bodies that are on those planes and how we are going to accommodate them. And, it looks like time is up, so I'll
No, that's good. I'm just trying to get all four of you in.
Yeah,
So
go for it.
thank you, Ms. Hewitt. Mr. Fenton.
Thank you. I'll be really brief. For blindness, there are some minor structural things that could be done, like I said, with the labels for the rows, making sure that the entertainment system is fully accessible. But we don't have the same kind of structural barriers that other people with mobility disabilities have. So this is my issue is more with services rather than structure in most cases. So I'll let my colleagues who have more to say about design speak to these issues.
Thank you, Mr. Fenton. And by the way, to the witnesses, there's nothing stopping you from putting written submissions in too. So if we miss something, you can send those in so the analysts can take that into consideration with their final report. Ms. Zev.
If Air Canada can design a contraption that allows for safe storage and flight of an equestrian program, as in actual horses that arrive in the same condition as when they boarded the planes, I would believe that there is a way to protect mobility devices today before we get to retrofitting or redesigning entire aircrafts. It starts there. Every single mobility device needs to be stored safely, protected properly, not treated or labeled as luggage. It's possible. They can do it for other things. They can do it for wheelchairs. And yes, the ultimate goal is to be able to allow people with disabilities to maintain their independence and their health. There are many people with disabilities who cannot be out of their wheelchairs at all, which means they are not traveling at all. There are solutions in the market today. You could even look at the pilot that Delta is doing to integrate a locking mechanism where a wheelchair can take the place of a seat on board. It's possible, but it starts with enforcement, and it starts with not seeing this as a courtesy, but as a right to maintain a person's independence. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zev.
Thank you very much. Prochainement, nous avons M. Barcelou-Duval.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. I am going to turn to Mr. Lupien for a question. Following on the questioning from Mr. Bacharach and other colleagues, Mr. Bataway, I would say, I apologize. I come back to the question how airplanes are designed and built. I understand that certainly we would like to see aircraft that take into account the difficulties and the problems that persons with disabilities are facing. Are there any that exist now? Have you ever experienced that, or is that something that remains to be built in the future? The first thing that I can tell you is this. An example in Quebec with Via Rail, it deals with adapting trains. It worked out very well, and the manufacturers were able to produce accessible trains with very good service. With respect to planes, as I said earlier, there was an American company, but unfortunately it went bankrupt. Are there manufacturers, airline manufacturers that we could consult? Yes, of course, but would they be willing to do it? That's another question. Thank you. That's a clear answer. So there remains much to be done, enormous work to be done. Ms. Ziv earlier talked about the importance of compiling data. I'm not quite up to date on the situation about data compilation, but Ms. Ziv, if you could tell us what that means, what changes should be made to give you better information about, say, for example, the problems that people with disabilities face.
So currently, the data that we have is very minimal and relies on the willingness of airlines to actually document and provide that when requested, if they choose to, and the reports that we have, the complaints from the CTA. But I know firsthand that the majority of people that I've engaged with disabilities, don't know what to do when they're in a situation and don't often deal with even filing a report because they don't think that there's any point. They don't think that they're protected. They don't think that the rights that they have currently are documented in any way that will actually resolve in a proper resolution. So we need data that actually automatically documents every single time that a mobility device is damaged or lost. And currently, we are only hearing the stories that reach the news, and that's not a proper, transparent accountability system.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ziv. Merci, Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Next, we have Mr. Bachrach. The floor is yours. 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm interested in this idea of extending rights as we understand them applying to people's bodies, extending those rights to include mobility devices. I think the testimony we've heard about how integral mobility devices are to people's lives very clearly makes the case for why that's reasonable. From a legal perspective, I'm wondering, and perhaps this is through to Mr. Brault and Mr. Resnick, whether any thought has been given to how this might be achieved. It's very difficult to crack open the charter. And so outside of that, are there ways that that could be reflected in law or in regulation that would have a similar effect?
Yeah. So simply put, we got the Accessibility Canada Act. We also have what Mayan Ziv is sitting on with the standards community about designing standards that will ensure that people and organizations respect our equipment and the way that our bodies are respected. But at the same time, the ACA, look, let's be honest with you, it could be amended. It could be added to it. There's a whole section just on transportation. And we can add the simple fact that the accessibility equipment that individuals use on a daily and functional basis can have and should have the same human rights that I'm up here to. And this way, it will put a little bit more into the legal framework that if something happens to my equipment, that I get to put in a charter right complaint. Again, no, it's. I've never heard this argument before. This is when I was showing up today. This is one of the ideas I wanted to present that we should look after. And I believe that once organizations like Air Canada, WestJet start understanding that our equipment have the same rights that we do as human beings, I believe it will start dramatically changing the way that they deal with our equipment and ensuring that our equipment, when we get to point B, is there and it's functional and it still works. Look, you've heard this from several key people here today. At the end of the day, all we're asking for is our rights to be observed, and that when we buy this service to travel, that we can have the same consideration that everybody else does, and that we have one little additional thing to ask for, and that is making sure that our legs, our equipment, whatever we use, is there in working order so that we're not damaged or we're not hurt wherever we're about to go to.
Thank you, Mr. Brault, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. I'm sorry, there was somebody who wanted to add something?
Oh, yeah, no, I was wondering if I can add just a quick 5-second point.
I see some nodding heads and improvement. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Resnick.
Yeah, so I just wanted to outline that this is already the law. Like, we don't require the charter. We have the ATPDR, which clearly states that airlines must be compliant with the Human Rights Act. And we can go through that process in order to ensure accessibility. So I just wanted to make clear that this process still does exist, and it just needs to be properly implemented.
Thank you very much, Mr. Resnick. We have Mr. Strahl up next, followed by Ms. Koutrakis, and then we have another 20 minutes. So for a total of 30 minutes, I just wanted to ask any of our witnesses if they need a break. If there are any witnesses that require a 5-minute break, we can do that and suspend for 5 minutes. I'm looking at our witnesses online. I don't see anyone. Okay, so we'll continue on. Mr. Strahl, I'll turn the floor over to you, sir. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to, Ms. Ziv, you kind of brought something up at the very tail end of one of your responses. You talked about how certain airlines are able to move horses or livestock or that sort of a thing in a safe and reliable manner. You can imagine the the international outrage or the justifiable hand wringing that would happen should a horse not survive an international flight. Yet people are, we heard from both you and Ms. Hewitt about how the damage to your personalized mobility equipment has permanently damaged has worsened your physical and mental health for years and years and years. Like these incidents, again, are not, well, that wasn't a good travel experience. This has negatively impacted my life for the foreseeable future. So maybe you can expand on that. We also heard the suggestion that we should treat equipment like minor children, where there is a dedicated person that is responsible for that equipment. So I hope you get what I'm trying to get at. How do we treat what needs to change very practically for you to be assured that your equipment that is life-giving and necessary to protect your physical and mental health is given the correct standing by the airlines? What would it take for you to have that level of safety? What needs to change specifically that we can recommend to government that they either request or compel the airlines to do to make that safe for you?
So the current reality is that airlines all over the world have violated the trust of disabled passengers because we don't have the safety or security or the confidence to know that our mobility devices will be intact and able to use. And the reality is that the aftermath of that is absolutely treated like a luggage claim. It is absolutely treated by the airlines as the best you might get is we'll pay for it. The device itself, which takes lengthy negotiations, documentation, working with vendors. In the first incident where my wheelchair was broken, the airline negotiated with me about which wheelchair would be more cost effective for them to replace. They didn't understand that down to the millimeter, my customized wheelchair empowers me to reach further, empowering the ability for me to use the muscles in my arm on a day-to-day basis. And then when I don't do that, those muscles atrophy. That's a permanent reality for me that is personal to my condition. Every person's disability is different, and the reliance that they have on their mobility devices is different. But we need to operate on the fact that when a person is forced out or separated from their device, there are dire consequences that are not documented or understood by the airlines or by the air travel industry today at all. It's not as simple as simply paying for the damage. What about the cost of our health,
right?
The lost time? So I'd say that it starts with redefining and understanding the problem, which is what the study is here to do, but then creating mechanisms that don't leave it at the goodwill of a kind person at an airline to decide how to handle the case. We need standardization.
Have you seen cases or done research about other jurisdictions? We heard the amount of money that the airlines make vis-a-vis the fines that they receive when a piece of mobility equipment is destroyed or not delivered, etc. Do you believe that a significant increase in fines would change airline behavior, or does it have to be more fundamental? A financial incentive or disincentive is helpful, but do you think is that the solution, or is it a more of a personal recognition of the damage that they are doing to people, not only at the time of the incident, but going forward? So is it a financial shift or a cultural shift, or both?
I think it's both. I think that the money talks. And I think that currently the way that the airlines handle this is a cost of doing business. That the damage associated is currently less to handle than actually proactively solving the problem. I think if we were to increase the penalties associated with damaging mobility devices, we would see much more proactive involvement because then it becomes a business decision. And right now, it's not considered one, and it needs to be.
Thank you.
Thank you
Mr. Chair,
very
thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strahl. Next, we have Ms. Katrakis. Ms. Katrakis, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses for your very compelling testimony before us here today. I have to tell you, as a parliamentarian, I'm very privileged to be sitting around this table and participating in this very important study. I have to tell you, I'm compelled to apologize to the entire community that has the community persons with disabilities, because in many ways I feel that as an able-bodied person, I had turned a blind eye or I wasn't sensitized to this information. So for me, it's been a great educational journey and learning, listening to all of you. And the time has come that as Canadians, we need to change this going forward. I mean, this is incredible testimony, and we cannot have a country like Canada not doing better in that space. I think we all learned through the pandemic the vulnerabilities. I mean, you know, many different areas had to be fixed in the transportation system. And this is why, you know, in June of 2023, the Minister of Transport at the time had, introduced Bill C-52, which you may be familiar, and it's the Enhancing Transparency and Accountability in the Transportation System Act. The measures that are proposed in this legislation would create a more accountable, transparent, accessible national transportation system that meets the needs of Canadians, everything that we heard here through you today. And so I'm only going to ask one question and give everyone the opportunity to once again stress for this study and for everyone that is watching. If you had the ability to make any improvements to the overall experience of traveling with a disability, what would you recommend that the sector focus on its efforts on? Obviously, there's a lot that has to be done, but if what should we be focusing on to make it a better experience? Ms. Hewitt, I'll start with you, and then Mr. Bro and everyone that's joined us virtually. I'd like to hear everybody's. So if you can keep your answer short, then we'll get a chance to hear from everybody. Thank you.
So I would say that there are things that we've talked about today that will take time. In the short term, we focus on education to create consistency. We have consistent safety announcements on every flight. We can all probably say them off by heart. We do not have a consistent experience when we go up to a check-in desk, So as I flew this time, very quickly, I will tell you that my first in Kelowna, I was told I couldn't take my chair on the plane because it was dangerous goods, because I couldn't remove the battery from it, and that's just absolute hogwash. When I got to Calgary to switch to the plane there, I was asked to drop my wheelchair at the elevator and then walk onto the plane and walk down the whole, runway and the tunnel-y thing that you go to. So I think there is the lack of consistency that can be created by education could turn a lot of the issues, not all of them, but could turn a lot of the issues round in a pretty short time. We can do it for a safety announcement. Let's do it for disabled people.
Mr. Bro?
There's a service now being offered by American Express in the United States for their members. For their members that are traveling with disabilities, American Express will actually provide an individual to meet you at the airport and follow you along your journey to the time you get onto the plane. And then there will be another representative on the other side if that's the service in the States. That's where, if you want one thing, again, I reiterate what Mayan Zev says, if we are going to start collecting data and then start providing the in-person service to help in making sure that we don't have to relitigate all the time and that there's one person that is helping me and the people with me to get to where I need to do.
Ms. Ziv?
I'd like to see co-creation with people with disabilities in every single policy, every decision, every training, every single thing that touches a disabled passenger's experience. We don't have the proper seats at the table. People with disabilities are the experts on this issue, as you have heard in this study, and yet we are not involved in the plans. We are not involved in the decisions made. We are not sitting at the boardroom when the executives are looking at this issue. That's the biggest change. If we're there, we can ensure that we have cohesion, we can ensure consistency and representation. It's missing, it's lacking.
Mr. Fenton?
I'll be brief. From a starting point, it is tiresome to have to prove over and over and over again that you have a disability and that you have to reapply every time for accommodation for each flight. We should develop an identifier number situation that we can use at check-in so that we with guide dogs and other people with mobility aids can check in themselves without having to go through a medical desk and spend an hour on hold waiting for help. Every program, service, or piece of equipment at the airport needs to be accessible to everyone with disabilities. All of us who are blind have had trouble with CBSA kiosks trying to get our photos taken to prove our identity because we can't line them up. We have apps from Canada Border Services where we have to take pictures of our passports that are inaccessible. And there's various other things. Like we need to have a group that looks at the travel experience from beginning to end, identifies the accessibility barriers, and works with the airlines through the development of binding standards on the industry to break down these barriers. The other piece I would talk about is you have the CTA committees that talk about accessibility and transportation. CATSA needs to have the same thing for security. The level of differences in ability and training between the various contracting security agencies in the airports in this country is staggering. And some of the questions that were asked as people with disabilities, like, what do you need this piece of equipment for? Or if they find a piece of equipment that they don't know what it is or how it works, they use that as an excuse to hand search you. And in my case, to ask me if I was carrying explosives or where do you work? And even better, how much money do you make? This is our reality. These are the kinds of things that we with disabilities face. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fenton. Je vois le main de Monsieur Lupin qui est levé.
I see that Mr. Lupin has his hand up. Would you like to answer the question? I just want to say very quickly that we are able, through our associations, to provide information, adequate information, but we have to be consulted first. So when we break a wheel, and it's not just my wheelchair that's been broken, my whole holiday has been ruined. So they have to be able to do something to help that.
Do a little bit of a rapid fire here. I'll give everyone 3 minutes so we can get through it. So Mr. Muse, I'll turn the floor over to you. 3 minutes, please.
Okay, so we've heard, I think, from you and from others. Obviously, these are not just the one-off incidents that are reported in the media. This is far more prevalent than, and I think, Mr. Bro, you said 40% of the time you had an issue. So this is far more prevalent than realized. Because it was raised, and I forget who raised it, the impact of travel delays, because it's one thing the travel experience end to end when everything runs on time, but travel delays we know are unfortunately and increasingly are increasing. There's more and more delays in Canadian travel, air travel. There has been. So what's the impact of that, and what can be done to help mitigate that, or I mean, when you're faced with this situation?
Can I speak to this? May I speak to this?
Please go ahead, Mr. Fenton.
Travel delays are quite profound for people who are blind, especially when there isn't someone available to take us to a new gate where the new aircraft may be leaving from. Other times when the delay is longer and we have to take our dog out again, we always have to go back. In some airports still, we still have to go back through security. And if your flight is to the US, you then have to re-clear customs again. So there are considerable barriers in certain circumstances. While some airports now have dog relief areas in them that mitigate against some of these problems, not all do. And, that is something that should be taken into account for dealing with people with travel delays, that they do have access to all the services, that we have access to all the services that we need during the delay.
Thank you.
If a flight is delayed to the extent that we have to have an additional layover, first of all, the impact on our bodies is massive because we weren't prepared for that. We may be going to a hotel room that we can't get into the bed and that sort of thing. If we get to a hotel room, because when the process comes, we've all been in those long lines when we've tried to, have our flights rebooked and vouchers for hotels and that sort of things. We're not treated any different to anybody else. And that maybe sound like equality, but it's not equity. The equitable experience for us is that the needs of our bodies have to come first. And so we need to be asked, are your medications okay? Are your food needs, as we talk about, I have a service dog as well, right? And so our dogs, are they taken care of? Has our equipment, sometimes if your suitcase has gone on to the final destination somehow, but you didn't, have you been separated from those things? So that door-to-door experience has to happen no matter what the situation is, whether there are delays, whether it's a normal all your flights line up. It has to be, because it's never a consistent experience.
Thank you very much. I see your hand up, Mr. Bro.
Yeah, I travel with my wheelchair, but I also have additional equipment that I have. And if it goes on to the next location and I don't have that equipment, and now I have to go and sleep in a room that I don't know is fully accessible without that equipment, it puts me into physical danger. So.
Thank you, Mr. Bro. Ms. Ziv, I saw your hand up. Oh, it's back up. Okay, I'll turn the floor over to you to add as well, please.
Just quickly, I just want to echo that point about equality versus equity. I can tell you last week I was on a flight in which was overbooked and they tried to combine two flights onto one. I was promised seat strapping, which allows me to secure my travel portable wheelchair onto the plane, in which it is taking 1.5 seats on the plane. It's strapped so that it stays with me and there's no need for any cargo issues. That was taken away from me because other people now needed to be on the plane. And so the point about, who pays more, who's more important, who's a priority, who's a super elite, disability is not really high ranking on that list right now. And so understanding the impact that it has on a person with a disability when these decisions are made in real time and everyone's angry and everyone's trying to fight for their needs, it's very difficult for someone who is often also withholding fluid intake because they don't know how long the flight's going to be or when they're going to see a next accessible washroom. So I'd like to emphasize the point about this is about equity. It's not about treating every single person the same because we don't all have the same needs.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ziv. We'll now turn the floor over to Ms. Murray. Ms. Murray, the floor is yours. You have 3 minutes, please.
Well, thanks very much, and thank you for sharing your experiences. I mean, it's very eye-opening for me, and I'm sure others, to hear about the stress, the pain, the humiliation, danger, and trauma of travel, and it's simply unacceptable. And we've talked and heard about a range of greater accountability standards, regulations, laws, penalties, education, and I think that is all very important testimony. MP Strahl asked the question, what would change airline behavior? And I think it was Ms. Ziv who said, or maybe this is MP Koutrakis' question, actually, co-creation of policies, plans, and decisions was an answer I heard. And so I want to dig into that just a bit. Co-creation. So in the Public Service of Canada, co-creation is done because the Public Service has the target of an equal number of people with accessibility challenges, as are in the general public, with the range of challenges, to be in the public service, to co-create policies, rules, regulations, and so on. And the public service also has the accessibility, accommodation, and adaptive computer technology unit to make sure that whatever the accessibility challenge is, that the public servant is supported to be effective. So I guess I would like your thoughts about whether there, in this need for a cultural shift, a greater amount of empathy, would you recommend that the airline, airport, air manufacturers actually target having public or their employees be representative of the universe of accessibility challenges that there are in the public, so there are people co-creating the policies, plans, decisions for the key deliverers of travel? So I'm going to...
I see Mr. Fenton's hand
Hewitt,
up. Ms. Murray, perhaps Mr. Fenton, you want to take the first stab at that?
I'll take the first crack at it. The problem with something like that is it's very aspirational unless governments at all levels are willing to implement laws, rules, or regulations to require that behavior. I'm not sure that in Canada that's where industry is, but I think taking the air transportation sector as a whole, I do believe that there is the ability of this committee to make recommendations to require airlines, if you're going to do business in Canada, you have to follow the public service standard. There is precedent for this in the Broadcasting Act, where broadcasters are given specific mandates to accommodate people with disabilities in their programming and have people representative of disability portrayed in the media. So there is the ability of this committee and of government to actually mandate these kinds of things within this sector. And I don't think we should take this too big. I think we need to remember what our scope is here and stay within scope and focus on what we can do within this sector to make the experience better.
Thank you, Mr. Fenton, and thank you, Ms. Murray.
I'd just like to say thank you for that recommendation, because this committee is not making rules and laws and policies, but we are hearing your recommendations, and they will be public.
Indeed. Prochainement, Mr.
Mr. Barcelo Duval, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you to our witnesses. We're going to do our best to serve you well in the report that we will be preparing. For Mr. Reznik, that'll be my last question today with the time that's left. So, Mr. Reznik, we heard from Air Canada, and we were given a document that explained how, in the matter of complaints, how hard they were working to try to settle complaints. But I do know that you, in the matter of Tim Rose, in that litigation, you have sought to have systemic corrective measures brought to the situation faced by people who are faced with difficulties in accessibility. So what precisely is the issue?
So the main issues, and thank you for the question, have been reflected by everyone today. The air transit is not accessible for persons with disabilities. And though I can't specifically, speak about the active litigation, the main issue is that airlines, they have the ability, they have the obligation, that is, to accommodate persons with disabilities. And that's the main thing that we're fighting for at ARCH, is just to ensure that the persons with disabilities receive that adequate accommodation and ensure that they have the idea of universal design, so that airlines are accommodating without the need of individual accommodation. So they start at the procurement stage, and then if need for individual accommodations, they deal with them on an individual basis to ensure the dignity for persons.
Peut-être une dernière question, si j'ai le temps.
If I have time, one last question. Is there any possibility for a carrier to plead legally that the costs for implementing those measures that are necessary would be too costly. Is there a legal basis for their position?
Yeah, so there is the duty to accommodate is up until something called undue hardship, which is the legal test. But this is a very high test, especially when considering the size of Air Canada. And I know they came out and they said they made $2 billion in 2023. So the test would be heightened for costs depending on the individual. So that would be the answer to the question. Thank you.
Merci, Mr. Barcelo-Duval. And finally,
thank you, Mr. Barcelo-Duval.
Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The issue of co-creation of policies and regulations is an important one, I believe, and the government recently announced that it would be convening a summit on accessibility in the air sector. And I wonder, briefly, to all of our witnesses, have any of them been invited to this summit?
Not yet.
Your phone is on. Okay, I'll take that as a no.
It is a no. Sorry, it's not registering for some reason.
No, that's. I'm assuming that if any other of the witnesses had been invited, they would have indicated as such, and I would offer it as a suggestion to the government that based on the testimony today, these folks would be excellent participants in that summit.
Mr. Bachrach, along those lines, as I stop your clock here, is it the will of the committee, perhaps, and with no objection to our witnesses, that their names be passed forward as potential participants in that summit? I see no objection. Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you. And then my next question is really around, Ms. Murray said we're not in the position of making laws, but we are very much in the position of making recommendations to the government, including in cases when laws need to either be amended or created. We have the Accessible Canada Act that was just passed in 2019, and yet it doesn't address many of the issues that have been raised in today's testimony. And so my final question is, can we depend on the industry to do the right thing voluntarily, or do we need the government to take a leadership role and legislate them, require them to do the right thing? And if so, what form should that take? And I imagine that every witness has thoughts on this. Perhaps I'll start with Mr. Resnick, and then we can go around the table until I run out of time.
I would start off just by saying that, as outlined earlier, we already have the ADPDR and really strong human rights legislation, and they need to be intertwined. They can't be seen as in a vacuum. Rather, it should be seen, as different cogs in a wheel towards full inclusion and accessibility. So I'll end there to let my other panelists.
Thank you, Mr. Resnick. I'll go to Mr. Breaux.
One of the fundamental parts of the Accessibility Canada Act is that no policy or decision should be made in vacuum without people with disabilities. And that is the fundamental concept of that particular act and legislation, and it's not being adhered to in this particular situation.
Thank you, Mr. Breaux. I saw Mr. Fenton's hand up, so I'll turn the floor over to you, sir.
A couple of things. First of all, we need to enforce what we have. We don't do a very good job at enforcing the regulations and in enforcing airline and airport human rights obligations. We need to enforce what we have. But I think within some of these sectors, we actually do need to develop new regulations and standards, especially around transportation of mobility devices, security, those kinds of things, to better accommodate people with disabilities, because there's major gaps there. And to respond to Mr. Breaux briefly, the problem with the Accessible Canada Act is there's no enforceability provisions. There's nothing that we can do to enforce our rights under that legislation. So whatever is developed, we need to have a strong enforcement mechanism so that we can assert our rights and have them adjudicated and have penalties imposed when appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Fenton. Next, I'll go to Ms. Ziv.
The airlines have known about this issue for a very long time. We haven't seen their willingness to actually address it proactively. We haven't heard much until more recently when this issue has kind of gained national and international attention. We do need regulations, and to echo the colleagues on the call, we need enforceability. We need the ability to ensure that not every issue is something that needs to go through litigation and falls through the cracks and takes over 7 years to resolve. It's not acceptable. So under Accessible Standards Canada, yes, there is a technical committee that will look at the accessible travel journey, but I think that there is an important part here to play in terms of the enforcement of how that will actually play out.
Thank you, Ms. Ziv. I'll go to Ms. Hewitt next, please.
Be brief. Mr. Bro mentioned the sentence in the Accessible Canada Act that says that every policy legislation has to be done in alongside disabled people. That's currently happening all over government, and I don't think broadly government has worked out what that actually means. So rather than every committee like this working out what co-creation with disabled people means, it would be great if we could actually sort that out. And so when we say to airlines, you need to co-create, this is how you do it.
Thank you, Ms. Hewitt. And finally, finalement pour aujourd'hui, je vais passer la parole à Mr.
Finally, Mr. Lupien. I just want to say one thing. When you talk about reasonable accommodation, very often in the eyes of others, it becomes unreasonable accommodation, and it doesn't do us any service. It complicates life. The airline companies and the manufacturers seem to want to put as many seats in a plane as possible for as many passengers as possible without taking into account our needs. I know that we should have the same rights, and we do have the same rights as passengers. We should be present when decisions are made, and we should be able to force the airline companies to make space for people with disabilities. It is your obligation. It is on you to do that for us. Thank you.
Colleagues, before I adjourn and before I thank our witnesses for being with us today, I just wanted to inform members that we received a communique from Her Excellency the Ambassador of Germany, Ms. Sparwasser, with an invitation to meet with the Honorable Minister of Housing, Urban Development and Construction, Clara Gewitz, between May 5th and May 7th. And I believe I've already spoken with many of you about this. I'm going to move the following motion, that the committee meet. I'll move the following motion that the committee meet in an informal meeting with the delegation from Germany on May 7th, 2024, and that the committee defray the hospitality expenses related to this meeting. It would happen between 1 p.m. and 2 p.m. and not take up any committee time, and I believe there has been some discussion. Yes, Mr. Bastien-Duval.
Are you going to be sure that there will be simultaneous interpretation available? Yes, 100%.
Seeing none, so adopted. I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of the witnesses for the time that they spent with us this morning, but also for the intimate stories that they shared with us. I can assure you that the information you shared will go a long way in strengthening the report and the recommendations that we put forward to the government. With that, I thank you, and this meeting is adjourned.